what's up, you guys? My name is Rory, and you are listening to Rory's Room, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything life throws at us. It is currently 6 o'clock in the morning, but I decided to wake up really early to film this episode because, one, me and Jacob are celebrating our Christmas today, which I am so excited. I am a really bad secret keeper, so especially with gifts, because gift giving is one of my love languages. It is so hard for me not to tell people what I get them for gifts immediately after. And as I stated in previous episodes, I have been buying Christmas gifts all throughout the year instead of just in 1 month to save money. Well, not save money, but spread out the cost of buying said gifts. And also because I make gifts with my paintings and stuff, it gives me more time to make those and plan that, and yeah, it's just crazy. Our anniversary and his birthday are also within a couple weeks of each other, so I always feel the need to plan ahead of time because I feel otherwise I'll just forget that I didn't get him something for a specific holiday. So that's just something else. But I'm so excited because I honestly can't even remember what I got him for Christmas, so it's going to be a surprise for me too. But I'm still super excited. And I also wanted to give myself a little bit more time to edit because, like last episode, I am trying to incorporate more visual aspects like introductions, and this episode specifically is going to take a long time because the topic that we're talking about in this week's episode is Spotify Wrapped, because that is something that we all love talking about, and Stranger Things 5 Volume 2. Personally, I have always been a fan of Stranger Things, dating back to Season 1, and so when I remember that this season was coming out, I was really eager to do this as a podcast episode, even though it's not really my style of stuff. But that being said, I don't really have a style of stuff, and the theme with Rory's Room is that we literally talk about everything and anything. So I figured it was only right to talk about this on the podcast. But looking at this outline, it's extremely long. It actually comes to about 33 pages, so either it's just a lot of bulleted information, or this episode is going to take a lot longer than usual. However, I do say that about pretty much every episode, and it's only usually a couple minutes longer than the last one. I did originally plan to wear different Stranger Things shirts, but because we are going home for the holidays, I actually packed up and vacuum sealed pretty much my entire closet, so all of my clothes are vacuum sealed in our car right now. I don't know if some of you recognize this shirt, but this hoodie was worn by Dustin in the first episode of Stranger Things. I feel like this is one of the pieces of merch that you wouldn't necessarily correlate to Stranger Things unless you really paid attention, because it's not Stranger Things merch. It's just I think it's the Museum of Minnesota. But as usual, before we get into this week's episode, we will first be talking about this week's favorites. I feel like it's only right for me to dedicate this week's favorites to my Spotify Wrapped because it's part of the theme. So my top podcast of 2025 is Crime Junkie, which I surprisingly haven't told you guys about yet throughout this favorites category. But Crime Junkie is one of the top true crime podcasts in the world, and it is known for its focused storytelling, emotional depth, and respect for victims, which creators have to be really, really careful in terms of this, because I feel like it can be really easy to disrespect the topic because obviously it's a really touchy topic. I actually did a research project for school about Netflix's documentary about Jeffrey Dahmer and the way the producers went about it and didn't get permission from victims' families and stuff like that. But I think one really good thing about this podcast is that a lot of the topics that they cover are actually brought in by people who have been involved. The hosts really do their research and make sure that they produce the podcast with a neutral and respectful tone. Ashley Flowers and Britt Prowat host this podcast, and I think it was produced or originated in 2017. So It's a very well-known podcast in true crime. Ashley originally volunteered with the Crime Stoppers of Indiana, and it was there where she drew inspiration for Audio Chuck and Crime Junkie. She also established a nonprofit called Season of Justice, where the profits that are collected are used for DNA testing for cold cases and support law enforcement and their methods to help with missing persons or cold cases, etc. Ashley serves as the primary researcher in this case, so a large portion of the podcasts are her, and her co-host Britt serves as kind of a, I want to say, like, listener perspective. So she brings up questions that we ourselves as the audience might have, which between the two of them really makes for an intriguing tone and conversation storytelling-esque. So I think that's one thing that really makes their podcast great. Each episode focuses on one case. Sometimes it'll relate to other cases if there is significance, like involving a serial killer or stuff like that. Some examples are missing persons, unsolved murders, etc. So basically anything that a true crime person could ask for. Crime Junkie episodes are structured in a way that is really easy to follow, and Ashley and Britt also pride themselves on being a victim-focused podcast, really driving home the emphasis on empathy and respect towards the victims and their families, which is sadly a uncommon thing to see in media because a lot of producers really drive for profitability and monetization off of these stories, which is the craziest thing because I feel like you can get monetization in a respectful way by promoting the story like Britt and Ashley do. However, it's not a common thing seen in contemporary media. It's the perfect thing to listen to when you're commuting from place to place or just looking for something to be on in the background while you're doing work. One of the biggest reasons why I think that this was my top podcast was because for the longest time I would be listening to back-to-back Crime Junkie episodes when I'm cleaning, which is like 3 hours or so every Sunday. But there was a large portion of time where I was listening to it. I think it was like 6 hours while I was playing the Balatro game, and I didn't even realize that much time had gone by until after the fact. There are a lot of popular true crime podcasts that people are familiar with, but I have only ever listened to Crime Junkie, which I feel like I could definitely broaden up my horizons, especially if I'm going to be promoting podcasts every single week for this podcast, but I feel like Crime Junkie will always be my favorite. And moving on, the song that I listened to most in 2025 was Inside Your Mind by the 1975. I really enjoyed listening to Inside Your Mind because I feel like it gave me a sense of main character energy, which, let's be honest, we all love main character energy. I actually have a playlist in my Spotify called Main Character Energy that I made, and it includes all of the songs that I feel like the main character to, and this song is definitely at the top of the list. I feel like the 1975 really drives home reflection in their music, so that's another reason why I really like this song. I listened to it a lot really early in the year during the spring because I feel like it gave the perfect vibe with the snow melting and the flowers blooming and really getting into that warm weather season. And lastly, one thing I can get behind versus one thing I can't. One thing I can get behind is definitely navigating your passion fearlessly because in my experience, there has been so much time that has passed where I stopped doing what I loved because I was scared of what other people thought. When I was a teenager, I had a YouTube channel. This was back when I was like, I think like maybe 12 or 13. I had started a YouTube channel with vlogs and stuff like that, but during that period of my life, the transition between elementary school and middle school was especially hard with bullying for me. People were always bullying me for a lot of things, but the fact that I was trying to become a YouTuber and make videos of my own, although it really reflected with my hobbies and my passions, I really got bullied for it, and it really took a big toll on my mental health. Eventually, I had enough of being bullied and I stopped for a very, very long time. I made a few videos in high school with my friends. I eventually stopped making vlogs and videos that included my face, and later on in high school, I started making film edits by creating edits from different TV shows and movies and fandoms and stuff and mixing them, which really drove home my passion for filmmaking. And I only rediscovered that once I went back to college and pursued my electronic media degree, where I am now, and I create fictional short films and TV shows and etc. And I'm kind of back where I once was with face videos with this podcast, now that I'm including a visual aspect, and it feels really, really good. I'm definitely feeling better at talking than I was in the beginning of this season, and I feel like that's such a good thing. I decided over the summer that I was just really tired of caring what other people thought and holding back on what I was passionate about. And I've been wanting to make this podcast for a very long time. Every successful person that I think of, I can't imagine them caring about what people think. Everyone has to start somewhere, and as we all know, we're all our biggest critics. So like, for example, if I'm constantly criticizing the way I'm talking in this podcast, I'm never going to get a sentence in. So that's one thing that I struggled with in the beginning. I've just kind of accepted who I am and what I like to do, and really have been driving that passion home. And don't get me wrong, it's so hard. This week has been so busy. It's the last full week that we're actually in town, so I've been trying to get together with all my friends before winter break and also film this podcast and juggle vet appointments and etc. And it's been crazy. I feel like this is the same with all passions, and this really connects to last week's episode where we talk about routines and developing rituals that you actually like doing. It's never going to be easy, but it does have benefits in the long run, and I'm really, really happy that I actually got back into doing my passion and not caring what people think. And last but not least, one thing I cannot get behind is combining birthday gifts and Christmas gifts. As someone who was born in the wintertime, not necessarily close to Christmas, I was born in mid-January, closer to late January, but it has always irked me a little bit, rubbed me the wrong way, because I feel like it just kind of lessens the impact of what a birthday is supposed to do. For example, you would not combine a birthday in the middle of June with a Christmas present. So why would you do that with someone who was born in December or January? As I stated before, December is a really, really big season for me, and it goes into January and February as well. Jacob was born on the 5th of December. Our anniversary is on the 15th, and then there's Christmas, and then my birthday's on January 16th, and Valentine's Day is right after, and it can be really easy to combine all of those, but I feel like it loses influence and purpose if you do that. This is another reason why I like planning the gifts throughout the year, so that way I can easily get gifts for every single holiday without feeling like there's not as much emphasis on a certain holiday. And moving on to one of this week's topics, Spotify Wrapped. I feel like a lot of people, even if they don't use Spotify, are familiar with Spotify Wrapped because it's just such a big thing. And it's always something people share on their stories. The day that Spotify Wrapped dropped, I kid you not, I saw so many stories, probably about 20 on my Snapchat and Instagram as well, where people were just sharing their top artists and stuff. And I never really did that. I kind of just shared it with like the people I knew. But now I'm making not an entire episode, but a portion of my episode is dedicated to Spotify Wrapped, and it's crazy. I feel like I'm definitely going to be exposed in this. Not so much, I don't think, because I went over it beforehand, but the numbers and statistics on how much music I listen to will definitely be exposing for sure. And speaking of exposing, I'm pretty sure that Spotify clocked me as 82 in my listening age, which 82 years old, I'm literally not even 24 yet. That's insane. But because I listen to a lot of 50s music, it just categorized me older than the majority of listeners. However, I don't know if this is a joke or if this is like an actual thing, but I've seen things saying that people are like thousands of years old because they listen to like Renaissance music and stuff like that, which I think is even funnier. I don't know if it's like a meme or like people are just kidding, or if it's actually something that Spotify said, but I just think that's the funniest thing. Spotify clocked me at listening 31,826 minutes, which, if you calculate it, is 22 days straight. 22 days. That's almost an entire month. Interpreting this, I genuinely feel like I lived inside the pair of headphones. And I also think this is a really big thing with running. I listen to a lot of music while I'm running, so I guess it's not that surprising that I listen to 22 days of music, but I guess it's still a shock. In total, I listened to 374 genres of music, which blows my mind because I didn't even know there was 374 genres of music. I just kind of I guess there's a lot of different styles of things, but I didn't think I really listened to that much. I just kind of listened to indie pop and etc. But one of the funniest things, I'm the kind of person that likes to listen to Christmas music year-round. One way that I can get the perfect deep clean is by listening to Christmas music. I will literally clean for double-digit hours. I love deep cleaning, but a Christmas deep clean it just hits different. People I used to work with were always criticizing me about listening to Christmas music throughout the year. And the people that I spend my time with now are definitely used to it, and they don't say things as much, especially with Jacob. He just kind of lets me do my own thing. But he is a big fall person, so I've been trying to dial it back during the fall season, so that way we can enjoy Thanksgiving and Halloween. But the entire time I'm constantly thinking about Christmas, but that's a different conversation. I did think it was really funny though how Christmas music was one of my top genres. It is really true to my character. If you know me at all, you would think that Christmas music would be in my top genres. Every single one of my top songs screams indie living in the woods, I think. For the longest time, and I still have this distant dream where I wanted to remodel a school bus or a van and travel the world. But I have a lot of motion sickness, so I don't even know how realistic that would have been. My top 5 songs were Inside Your Mind by the 1975, For Emma by Bon Iver, Meet Me in the Woods by Lord Huron, Oklahoma by Jack Stoiber, and Crooked the Road by Monrovia. And I feel like they're all in the same category of indie music. There was definitely a large portion of time in the spring where, I was saying, the weather gets warmer, where I was listening to all these indie songs, and it definitely showed in my Spotify Wrapped for sure. I do still have a soft spot for those songs. One of my absolute favorite songs, I think it was my top song of 2024, was Swan Upon Leda by Hozier. It was literally on repeat for all hours of the day for a good couple months. And I think this was around the time where I thought I was dropping out of college, and I was really convinced that after the semester ended, I would be living off the grid somewhere remodeling my bus. But that never happened, and I still kept listening to that song. It's just so good. There's a part in that song where it's talking about how, I think it was a grandmother smuggles medication to keep her grandchild alive, and it really hit so hard, especially during that time with politics and stuff like that. But I highly recommend you listen to that song, even though it's not the song of the week. Just trust me, it's so good. I listened to almost 2,000 artists throughout the year, but it is no surprise that my top artist was Tate McRae. I feel like I get into specific seasons of my life where I just start listening to artists on repeat, their entire soundtrack, and I do that with a lot with Tate McRae. In total, I listened to her songs for 699 minutes, and that made me one of her top 2% global fans. I first started listening to Tate McRae in 2020 after I went through a breakup, and fans of Olivia Rodrigo, Tate McRae was my go-to breakup music. And the top song that I went to was You Broke Me First. That hit so hard. I literally had that on repeat, crying my eyes out in the parking lot of a beach and laying on the beach all day in the sun and listening to that song. It was so good. And I really, really like her new songs. They're definitely one of my favorite things to listen to while I'm doing cardio. They just hit so good and really drive cardio for me. The next artists were Selena Gomez, Somber, Frank Sinatra, and Shawn Mendes. And Frank Sinatra really dates back to the 50s, where Spotify called me 82. that's just an example of some of the music that I like to listen to. I feel like Storm, our cat Storm, her middle name was actually Sinatra, so we played that a lot for her when we adopted her. And a lot of his songs are also mine and Jacob's songs, so we listen to that a lot. But I really do enjoy that type of music. The top albums that I listened to were I Said I Love You First by Selena Gomez and Benny Blanco, So Close to What by Tate McRae, Handwritten by Shawn Mendes, Mountjoy by Mountjoy, and Love and War by Flurry. I started listening to I Said I Love You First by Selena Gomez almost as soon as it came out while I was doing half marathon training, so I would just listen to that entire album for the large portion of time when I was training that week. And because I was so focused on running, I never changed the music, so it just constantly played the entire album over and over again until I stopped running. And that's probably why it's one of my top albums. I'm actually surprised that it beat Tate McRae because I listened to that a lot. I may not listen to it all at once, but I definitely listened to it numerous times in quantity. And Handwritten by Shawn Mendes is one of his older albums, but it's one of the most nostalgic things. I used to be a big Shawn Mendes fan in high school especially, and moving back to like his MagCon era, I was a big fan of MagCon. And I feel like there's just a sense of nostalgia that his newer albums cannot compete with Handwritten for. So I like to listen to that occasionally, like during certain eras of my life where I listen to Tate McRae or Girl in Red, etc. The club that Spotify put me in was called the Soft Hearts Club, which is basically like people who make playlists a lot, and that really checks out because I've always made a lot of playlists and I like to personalize my music to fit certain experiences like working out, calm music, essay writing, etc. But I also really like making personalized playlists for people for gifts. And I did that a lot this season, towards the end of this year. So that's no shock that that's the club that I'm in. The Wrapped Files section really called me out though, because like I could go from like listening to like Elvis and Tame Impala to PewDiePie, which is crazy because I don't even remember listening to any PewDiePie songs. However, there are like parody songs that I come back to like every couple of years of my life. I don't know if you guys have heard it, like Brofist made by Rumi. And the same thing goes with like the Five Nights at Freddy's songs. Maybe I'm exposing a little too much of my nerdy self. And this is what I was talking about by exposure. I'm just gonna stop talking and we're gonna move on to the next topic. Stranger Things recap from volume 1. This volume was a lot, and we've only gotten 4 episodes, so there's a lot to cover here. This is one of my favorite shows, especially like dating back to when it started, which is crazy to think that it started almost 10 years ago. If I'm correct, we're going to be getting another 4 on Christmas Day, and the finale comes on New Year's Eve. I can't remember the exact dates. So we're gonna have about 9 episodes total. But one of the big things about this season is that the episodes are longer as well, so they're about like an hour and 10 to 15 minutes long, so they're almost the length of a movie. So you're watching about 4 movies per volume, which is crazy. You can definitely tell that they're trying to cram everything into the last season and fill in plot holes and stuff like that that were kind of left alone in the dark in previous seasons. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot. Spoiler warning, if you have not seen this volume of Stranger Things, please do not listen to this podcast because I'm going to just dive deep and expose it right away. So if you haven't seen it, please do not listen. I'm not going to be warning you every single time I say something, so this is your last warning. One thing that really reminded me of previous seasons was when Elle and Hopper were in the Upside Down and Elle brought up the COM promise quote from season 2, episode 2 of Trick or Treat Freak. It really reminded me of their time in the Upside Down together, like when they were closing the gate and etc. But Elle's direct quote of the COM promise for compromise really brought us back to where it all started and how far they have come. Another way that the Duffer Brothers really revisited origins was by placing Erica in Scott Clark's class, because it really defines how much time has passed. She is now the same age that her brother and the party were when the show originally started. And I also got so excited when I saw that Scott Clark was in this show, because I feel like they had his character, and once like the plot really started developing, he kind of just disappeared and was never talked about again. And I really do like his character because everybody loves an inspiring teacher. They also did a really good job at connecting everything by placing Hawkins' lab as the center of the wall. Like Lucas was talking about in this season, there really is no coincidences and everything has purpose and interconnectivity. So the fact that Hawkins' lab is the center of where everything is happening, that's such a good way to connect. And speaking of interconnectivity and consistencies in the series, one of my absolute favorite things has been watching Robin and Steve's dynamic as they work at different dead-end jobs like Scoops Ahoy, Family Video, and now The Squawk. As someone who works and is learning communication, I felt very seen in this season because I work with like radio and video and stuff. So it was nice seeing the way that they portrayed radio broadcasting and put that area of that into the series. I feel like it fits a lot with like the AV Club where it all originated, which also brings us back to revisiting origins. It was just a really good decision to have them work at the radio station. It also brings us back to, I think it was, I want to say season 3, where they would drive up that van up to the top of the hill and have to talk, like work with the antenna while Dustin was at that Camp Nowhere. I don't know, it just provides a sense of nostalgia and really revisits origins, like I was saying before. There has been a lot of interconnectivity in the characters as well, like when Murray puts Dustin in his place when he criticizes him for not getting all of his supplies, and Nancy puts Murray in his place for trying to tell her what to do by saying that the tracker would not sustain going through the Demogorgon and all of the stuff like that. So it's like character after character putting each other in their place, and I really respect Nancy's badass characteristics. She also indirectly said that she was going to shoot Murray in the balls, which I really liked because I have heard some controversy on his actor, but also his character kind of makes me mad, like how he was talking to Jonathan and basically telling him to take advantage of Nancy's vulnerability and slide in to get intimate with her, and Hopper's decision to stab his knife into the flesh wall also connects him to the Officer Aker, who, if you're not familiar with him by name, he's the one that Eleven and Hopper held hostage for information to interrogate him, and that brings the kind of indirect antagonist into the conversation, where instead of killing him, they keep him alive and he then escapes to make their life a living hell later on, which literally had me screaming at the TV like I was watching a horror movie. Like, you can't keep him alive, he's not dead, he's gonna come back and ruin your life and give you so many obstacles, but obviously they can't hear me and it's a fictional universe and things were set up the way they were set up for a reason, but it just had me feeling like I was watching a classic 80s horror movie where someone is just like tiptoeing down into the basement and you're telling them not to do that. Also, one major thing of editing that really caught my eye was the feeling of Holly being watched while she was getting the mail, and we later found out that she actually was being watched and Max was the one who sent her the letter saying to meet Henry out into the woods. I feel like there's a lot of interconnectivity between Steve's character as well compared to previous scenes. If you didn't know, Steve's character was actually supposed to be killed off in season 1, but because his character got such a big fan base around it, they decided to keep him, which personally I'm happy with. I really like Steve's character, but he has upgraded with different parallels through the seasons, like the studded baseball bat that came with season 1 and upgrading that to the chainsaw this season 5, or when he hit the Demogorgon with the car outside of the barn and how that connects to when they hit the, I think it was a Demogorgon, it might have been the Mind Flayer, but I feel like the Mind Flayer was so big. Regardless, they hit the creature from the Upside Down outside of the Starcourt Mall. I think it was called Starcourt, but it really brings parallels back to previous seasons like that, and I really, really appreciate that, especially because it revisits origins, like I was saying, and provides a sense of nostalgia and recap with seasons. In terms of marketing, I was very, very surprised how personalized this series was. You could definitely tell that they had a bigger budget in terms of making this show, because the majority of the ads that I saw while I was watching the show were Stranger Things based. For example, Nancy and Jonathan within the Discover Cashback commercial, Murray in Dr. Squatch, and even Ted in Target commercials, which was so crazy. You could definitely tell that he had a bigger role in this season. It wasn't entirely too big, but he had a lot more screen time than he did in previous seasons, where he was portrayed as like the deadbeat dad, and now he actually had single moments on frame where he was the only person in frame, and so that was cool. Jacob actually predicted that they were going to die before the scene even began, and I did not agree, because I didn't think that they would kill off those characters, because I feel like Karen and Ted were such smaller roles in the series, so it actually surprised me how much they got involved in the volume 1 of season 5. As a filmmaker, I also really enjoyed the way that they formulated this season, because it's such a cinematic experience. For example, the way that the camera followed Will as he fell when he first saw through the Demogorgon's eyes was so good. There are a lot of cinematic parallels, not just in Stranger Things to this fall, but from other series like Breaking Bad with characters like Howard Hamlin and Chuck McGill. If you know, you know. But the way that they followed his fall was so good. You could definitely tell that they had a specific movement, and they did that numerous different times, so I really respected that. The way that they formed specific scenes too, like where Karen and Ted were dying and in their scenes where they were facing the Demogorgon head on, it really had you wondering what was going to happen. Personally, like I said before, I didn't think that they were going to die, because I feel like in a lot of crucial scenes like that, the scene is drawn out more, versus what we saw in the very quick frames was just significant damage, and their chest clawed open and their necks clawed open, and it immediately went back to the plot and didn't revisit it until later on in episode 2, where they opened with them going into the hospital. It really had me wondering though, because I was looking back and I paused it and I was like, oh my gosh, that's actually a lot of blood. And then I started to wonder whether they would actually survive, especially with the way that they slow panned up to Karen's body and mixed that with flashbacks of when she was fighting the Demogorgon. And for the beginning of that scene, we were only able to see the blood and her feet and her body, but we weren't actually able to see her breathing or her head until later on when Nancy actually approached the body. It was during that sequence where I was like, okay, maybe she actually did die, because this scene literally gave me chills with the way it was edited. It was so cinematic, and I literally geeked. I thought she was dead in that time, and I had changed my mind completely where I thought that there was no way that they could kill her. I changed my mind. I still thought Ted was alive, but I thought Karen was dead for sure. Also, the dial tone really pulled that scene together. The sound effect really encompassed what Nancy was feeling in that moment, I feel like. And personally, it kind of provided a sense of symbolism to like the ringing in your ear and like the nauseated feeling. And it even mimicked like a flat line in a way. And that's another reason why I feel like I was convinced that Karen was dead, because it was like such a static sound, and it really mimicked that flat line. It literally gave me chills, and the sound effects really reminded me of like a blockbuster movie. The producers also really emphasized multiple perspectives at once. Like when we learn about Mr. Whatsit and Karen writes down his name letter by letter, we get closer and closer to seeing who Mr. Whatsit actually is when she writes down Henry. And as she gets closer to finishing his name, we start to hear his voice clearer and see more and more aspects of his outfit and his body. And as she writes the letter Y, we actually get the first image of Henry's face, and we identify him as One or Henry Creel or Vecna. This is also when he's bringing Holly into his house in the prison world that he has built. I believe that's where the episode closes. But it's crazy, their editing and how it really puts things into perspective, unlike other seasons where it's kind of chronological. They definitely had a bigger production budget though, because what was that frame where Vecna stuck his fingers through that guy's face? It was so close up and I was literally like, it literally had my jaw dropping. I was like, oh my God. And Jacob was like, yeah, someone literally argued for that to be put in. Like, it had to be in the conversation. Vecna's costume was also very different than what it was in previous seasons. I feel like in this season, it was a lot fleshier versus previous seasons where it was kind of clunky and kind of gave off like a, I want to say plasticky, but I don't think that's the term, but you could definitely see the difference between editing and how that has changed since they started his character. In terms of critique, I feel like there's a lot to talk about in this season, in both good ways and bad. Season 4 literally ended in the most apocalyptic way possible, with the world literally splitting in half, and Season 5 seemed to really resolve this off screen just by like placing gigantic metal band-aids and cement into these cracks and not really taking it seriously in terms of regular civilization. Kids were literally sledding down these cement band-aids and getting super close to military bases, and it didn't seem like there was like a threat level registered in any of these kids' minds, which I understand is like a characteristic of children, but I feel like if the world were to split in half and I was a kid, I would not want to go down that. Are you kidding me? That's a death wish. There was also a lot of conversation in this series where I feel like was just very unrealistic. Like, no one would talk like that. Like when the bullies approached Dustin in the cemetery and that one kid said hiya. Like, I get that. Like, it might have been a trend, but it kind of made me cringe. And like when Holly was approached by Max in the prison world and she was trying to determine whether she was one of the monsters or not, and Max was like, well, would a monster know that your brother tried to get a mohawk in freshman year and I stopped him? And I was like, no one would ever say that. Like, first of all, would that really distinguish you from the monster in a Stranger Things universe? Like, isn't Vecna literally a mind-controlling entity? Can't he literally invade your thoughts? He could easily lie to you about that, but it seemed to convince Holly. And then when Robin said, and for me, I like Dick, I was like, what? Don't you ever say that. Stop it. They literally had to be trying so hard to get to be quirky like that, and it just was not giving the effect that they wanted it to. And the same thing goes with when Mike and Lucas were in the tunnels and they said, let's just not hope it's too hard. And Lucas said, if it is, I'll soften it. I was like, that one was a little bit more realistic because boys will be boys, and especially like high school boys that are like eager to make anything dirty. But like, I was like, there's no way they just said that. I literally turned to Jacob and I was like cringing. I didn't like that. Also, when Derek was approaching the barracks and the military men literally threatened that Derek might get shot with a laser if he doesn't keep walking, they were so rude to him for no reason. He's just a kid. It's not like he was trying to like scour the base. I mean, he was the inside man, but there was no determining factor as to why they would know that. So like, that guy was just being unnecessarily rude to him for no reason. Also, one major critique that I had in this season was Holly's character. In earlier seasons, she's portrayed to be about like 3 or 4. And if the timeline is right, she would be about 7 in this season. And she is not 7. I think I actually read something where it said that she was supposed to be 7, but they wrote her as 9 or 10, which that's just the plot hole in itself. If the producers and writers knew that she was supposed to be 7 and they still wrote her as 9 or 10, that was just an ill decision on their part. They could have very easily fixed that by just writing her as younger and putting her in a lower grade. Her grade isn't a big thing. They could still have her on the playground and stuff. And they could easily find a child actor that could do good for her. Like child actresses. They don't have to cast a teenager. I'd be interested in wondering why they made these choices, but obviously I'm probably not going to have the opportunity, so I'm just gonna have to speculate. It just rubs me the wrong way in a sense. And it's also not that surprising that they've had conflicts like this. The show has been written and produced over about a decade, so age issues is not a surprising thing. The majority of the actors and actresses started this when they were really young, and now they're in their 20s. It's not surprising to see that they look completely different. However, it does affect the continuity of the series because I feel like no one ages that fast, and you can definitely see how much time has passed cast and the actors, despite the producers trying to make it seem like with like makeup and stuff. And this is proved when they had to CGI Will in Earlier Memories. When it opened with that, I was literally jaw on the ground, shaking my head, laughing. Literally called it before I watched the show. I think either Jacob said something or I said something about how the fact that Earlier Memories would have to be like CGI'd. We never thought they'd actually do it, but they did. And characters' actions were also kind of unrealistic in some scenes. Like when Lucas walked up to the bully when they were bullying Dustin for wearing the Hellfire shirt. I think it was supposed to be intimidating, but it was anything but. Personally, I don't think Lucas is very intimidating, so when he was walking down the hallway trying to look all buff, it didn't scare me. I actually kind of laughed. And other things like when Ted and Karen don't hear Holly screaming or the Demogorgon literally tearing through their ceiling, I just found it unbelievable. Like Karen was literally just a few doors down and she didn't hear the Demogorgon literally busting through her house. Ted I can get behind a little bit more because he was outside playing golf, but I still feel like you would hear if your house was literally falling apart. I get that they were trying to like add like a little bit of an edge where like she obviously would disappear without anyone knowing, but I just thought it was kind of unrealistic. That also can be applied to when they're busting down the bathroom floor in the barracks when they're trying to break out the kids that Vecna may be targeting. You're telling me that none of the guards and none of the kids heard them hitting through the floor and breaking wood, and none of them heard that? They must be the worst guards in the history of ever. That's just insane. In terms of plot holes, I'm really happy that they fixed the 8 plot hole from season 2. They visited her character in season 2 as like a complimentary character to 11, then they just never talked about her again. And I was actually genuinely convinced that they were just going to leave it be and not talk about it again. And I'm really happy they didn't, because like a lot of things, it could just be easily solved. I feel like this series, and especially this season, has a lot of plot armor. And if you don't know what plot armor is, it's basically like where the stakes are significantly lessened because producers refuse to have long-term consequences for characters or refuse to kill them off. And I feel that is especially evident in this season. For example, like I was saying before, season 4 literally ended in one of the most apocalyptic ways possible, with like the earth splitting in half. And like when Lucas was clutching Max's body as she died, she was bleeding from her eyes. And even if she is no longer dead and is instead in a coma, shouldn't she be blind? We see her in the dream, or not the dream, the prison world, and she's not blind. And that just could be like a stylistic choice, how like she's kind of like not in her body. And you see like when people are portrayed in like heaven and stuff and they look completely different, or like they look like what they did when they were younger and not like the way they died, which I could see that. But if she wakes up and she doesn't have significant eye damage, I'm gonna find that hard to believe and kind of like plot armor, because there's no way that he literally snapped her wrists and like joints and stuff and she doesn't have significant damage to her body. Like she could still be alive, but she's still gonna have a lot of physical restraints. So I really hope that they don't just like coast over that, and when she finally does wake up, she just stands up and walks back to like her normal life. Speaking of blindness, I feel like another form of plot armor in this is when Dustin casts prismatic spray in the cemetery, where he was talking about how in his last campaign with Eddie, he cast prismatic spray, which causes blindness, and then he throws the grave cleaner at one of the bullies. And of course that you can kind of see in close-up frames where it like burns their faces, but they don't cause blindness. And I feel like it would be really cool if it actually did cause blindness, like even if they did keep going after them in future episodes. But I feel like because it didn't cause blindness, we can kind of see or predict that the bully is going to kind of pursue him in like a kind of Jason archetype, like the last season, where he comes back in the end to serve as an obstacle to Dustin until he meets his untimely death. But still, I feel like the characters are without consequence this season. Literally, one thing that blew my mind was how easily they were able to just drive through people's yards and break through their fences and kidnap entire families, and nothing came out of it. I feel like, considering their involvement in 11's history and the fact that they have been involved in everything, especially Hopper and Joyce, I find it unrealistic how the government does not have surveillance on them. Like, you'd think if 11 is such an important thing and such a desirable target, they'd want to know where she is, and so the first place they would go and research is the people who are most commonly with her, but it doesn't seem like there's any surveillance on any of the characters. And while I do really like the editing, I feel like there is a major tone shift in how editing was in previous seasons and how it is now. You can very much tell that the season is not 80s nostalgia or like kind of like thriller-esque. It's more like blockbuster movie, like I was saying before. And I'm all for praising advancements in editing and stuff, but I feel like with a show like this, it's really important to maintain consistency, and that's with like every show as well. If you start making things out of the blue and making things differ from one another, it just kind of breaks like continuity. And not to mention, I feel like a lot of people view this show as their childhood, considering it's been developed over a span of 10 years. And breaking this consistently kind of means for like a twist of perception, so people might not view it the same way as they previously did. Also, lighting in specific shots and scenes, like when they wheeled Ted and Karen into the hospital, it really made me feel like I was in like a poltergeist movie. I get what they were trying to go for there, and I know that color is constantly changing and is very important when you're trying to emphasize emotion in scenes, but I feel like they changed it so often that I felt like I was being pulled in so many different genre directions that kind of like blurred the consistency of the editing and tone of the show. I feel like they did a really good job with rising action. For example, like the early burn being the call to action and the plan failing, so the characters have to restart from square one with the obstacles in mind. And it is formatted correctly, but I can see why the plan failing repeatedly can get on the audience's nerves. And while I critiqued the seriousness of the characters and how I didn't feel like they were acting serious enough or taking the situation seriously enough, I do feel like that the way the Duffer Brothers positioned the plot really drives home the ability to intensify the emotion through the episode and allow for more rising action. One thing I did notice is that there was no damsel in distress role in this season, unlike last season where like Chrissy was the damsel in distress. There is, like I said, a dumb jock role still in question, like how Jason was one of the indirect antagonists in season 4, and this season it's another character. I don't remember his name exactly, but he's like a replacement for Jason in my opinion. He's literally wearing the same Letterman jacket as what Jason was wearing, so I don't know. I feel like it definitely follows a specific format. Also, this kind of like fits with like the editing aspect of things. Also, in terms of plot, I didn't realize that at first, but Will's spinning vision and Holly's experience on the playground appeared right after each other in the series, and it was all set up in front of our eyes. And although I could kind of guess it, I didn't notice it entirely until I watched it the second way through. Of course, I knew that they were both factors, but I didn't know they happened right after each other. I also found it extremely interesting how Mr. Whatsit is portrayed to be the hero in disguise in the beginning before we realize that it's Vecna, even though we can kind of guess that it might be. And then after we identify him as Vecna, we obviously know he's a villain. And that compares to how Derek was portrayed to be the bully in the beginning, but then he's transformed into delightful Derek and one of our protagonists in the end. I find their arcs really to be interesting. And much like when Derek turns into delightful Derek, when Mike gives Holly her D&D piece, she kind of transforms into Holly the heroic, making a necklace out of it and clutching it whenever she wants to feel brave. This necklace continues to be a symbol throughout the entire volume. For example, like when she gets that note in the mail from Henry and goes out into the woods to find him, you can see that she clutches onto it, that way she can feel brave before going into that difficult time. Another form of symbolism is the book A Wrinkle in Time. I didn't get it at first because they didn't provide a lot of context on it, but from the research that I did, Mr. Whatsit in Stranger Things is Mrs. Whatsit in the book, and as Holly talks about later on when she's talking to Max, Camazotz compares to the Upside World in terms of prison worlds, and characters like Meg can have comparisons with characters in Stranger Things, and so there's parallels there. There were specific parts of this season that I really liked, like when Holly and Karen hid under the bathwater, and while it is probably unrealistic that they weren't found or that they were able to hold their breath that long, it did have me smiling and kicking my feet. Like, it was so well edited, and it was definitely a cinematic method of hiding. I thought it was so cool, especially with like how the camera panned from where the Demogorgon was and beneath the water and where they were. I've always loved shots like that where they were able to see, where the audience is able to see numerous different layers, like going through water and stuff with refraction. I also feel like editing was done so well. Like when Will got his powers in the end and they kind of had his life flash before his eyes in kind of like a film real-esque way with Robin's voiceover. It was so good. It literally had me in tears. I know a lot of people that had that same effect on too. Like one of my friends has their background on Discord literally being the swing set scene between Mike and Will. It's so good. I thought that was such a good addition. I also noticed like an Easter egg in Max's cave, the cave that she hides from Vecna in. There's a for sale sign in the back, and I wonder maybe she had gotten it from her old house. Like if Hawkins is in this prison world, like the entire city, it's possible that she went to their house and took that for sale sign back as like a momentous symbol. I thought that was really interesting. I paused it and I saw it, and I thought that was a really good Easter egg on the production side. I also wrote down some of my favorite quotes from the season, like when Erica was supposed to call 911 when she had when she put like benzos in the pie and the entire family had passed out, but Tina did not eat the pie, so she's like, Erica, I told you to call 911, and Erica says, and I told you to eat your damn pie. I thought that was so funny. There's also like the quote from Joyce where she says, it's harder to save the world when you have the sniffles, or when she's talking to Derek later and she says, you're not dipshit Derek, you're, and he finishes the sentence with delightful Derek, and later says, Ashley Klein is a snitch. I felt that one. Ashley Klein is a snitch. They could have got that done so well too. I mean, the bathroom was flooding, but if she hadn't said anything, they probably could have got everyone out. Not that it would have turned out really good, considering Robin and Murray's vehicle were flipped over and the kids were stolen anyway, but for the plot, I guess. In terms of character development, obviously there was a lot of character development in this season. We watch as Will, the character who the whole show was written around basically, becomes less of a side character and it really develops into a main character. Like, he experiences seeing through the eyes of upside-down creatures like the Demogorgon in episode 1 as it approaches the Wheeler's house, and then he sees through Vecna's victims like Holly and Derek as Vecna invading their minds. And I feel like he just had more screen time than in previous seasons, which blows my mind considering, like I said, the entire series is kind of written around his character, but he was kind of just portrayed as like a submissive character in a sense, like a side character. In this season, Will kind of gains his own personality and power and draws who he really is, and I feel like that has significant role to play through his relationship with Robin and him finally getting scenes with her. I feel like it's kind of been like a desire of fans for Will and Robin to get scenes together, especially people who advocate for their sexuality to be unraveled in this series. I feel like for the longest time, although in season 3, Robin came out as gay to Steve, her sexuality kind of wasn't talked about a lot. And I feel like in this season, it's finally addressed, and I really, really do appreciate that, and I'm sure a lot of people do as well. Jacob did mention that there would be like a really good significance in like, right now it's like Will the Cleric and Will the Wise. We wonder if it would have had more correlation if he was like a warlock, because Vecna controls him in a sense. It's like that might have been a better class decided for Will, but I can also see Cleric too. As Will gains more confidence throughout the season, we see him finally snap and tell Joyce that her plan sucked, and the only reason why they're getting information is because they decided to go with Will and Robin's plan. This is extremely new to his character because, like I said, he kind of has been very submissive and he never really got the arc that he deserved. Will goes from zombie boy to tackling Derek and tapping into the hive mind to see things that Vecna didn't even want him to see, like the other 3 kids that were kidnapped other than Holly. However, as he gets more confidence and gets character development, we also see a new weakness of his to be revealed. When he is tapped into the hive mind, he feels the way the hive mind feels. Like when the Demogorgons are getting burnt with a flamethrower, he feels like he's getting burnt by a flamethrower, which I can only expect shows up later in the series to be a detrimental thing, especially if Will is working in the good's favor, in the protagonist's favor. It can definitely be a obstacle they're going to have to pass. Afterwards, when the party is kind of captured by the military and questioned as to why they were breaking into the barracks, the Demogorgons come back and obliterate the base. And obviously, this is when Vecna comes through the gate and quite literally belittles Will and blames the whole war on him for being a weak-minded 11-year-old boy, which is so crazy. He did not hold back at all. This is ample room for Will to have character development because, as we saw in the finale of Volume 1, Will finally takes control of the hive mind and can snap the bones of the Demogorgons and suspend them in air so they can't kill his friends. And I thought that was insane. And not only that, but like I was saying, when his life flashed before his eyes and Robin's narration showed up, it was such a good piece of editing. And also the signature 11 nose wipe, where she uses her entire arm and wipes away the blood from their nose. Insane. You can definitely tell that a new protagonist is emerging, and it's not just 11 being alone. She also has 8, of course, but I feel like this is Will's time to shine for sure. Jonathan, on the other hand, doesn't get as good of character development as Will does. I feel like his character in this season is kind of shallow, and all of his energy is basically targeted towards Steve, and he's convinced that Steve is trying to win back Nancy. And although I don't condone Steve's actions, he could definitely be better at it, I do think he's just being a good friend. And we found this out later, Steve really calls out Jonathan for being a bad boyfriend. He literally calls him a paranoid pothead weirdo and basically calls him out for being so distracted when Nancy's going through stuff. I feel like Dustin also drew the short straw in terms of character arcs. He developed an angry personality and kind of an attitude after Eddie's death, where he acts like he has nothing left to lose. And personally, I think he's kind of unbearable to be around versus his character previously. That being said, as a filmmaker and a writer, I can see the significance of his character development and I can respect it. I actually dreaded the scenes that he was in because I just knew he was going to be so rude. This reps back to when Murray had to put Dustin in his place for when he was criticizing him for not getting all of his supplies. And he was kind of more grounded in this experience, and then he immediately gets back into character with the I don't care attitude and drills through Steve's beamer for the telemetry tracker. I really do like the arcs with Joyce's character this season though. I learned a lot through classes over the last semester in terms of framing and such, so I noticed a lot of frames where Joyce was left alone in the frame to emphasize her character arc. For example, when Hopper closes the trapdoor and doesn't answer Joyce's question, leaving her alone outside kind of really portrays how alone Joyce may feel in this situation and her not wanting to lose someone else again, like Hopper or Will again, or lose her love interest like Bob Newby, she might lose Hopper in this season. She's gone through a lot, and she just kind of doesn't want to deal with that again. This is further confirmed after Will snaps and tells her that her plan sucks. She's never seen this side of him before, and she realizes and admits later on that she's a lot and is very hard on him. But we learn that it is because she blames herself a lot for his disappearance in the first place. She says that she didn't check on him for 8 hours, and she never wants to go through that again. So after learning this, Will and Joyce kind of reunite and come back together after their fight. Their relationship is restored. But we learn a lot about Joyce's character in this conversation. We know that she has been hard on him, and we know that she's kind of strict. But it is in this scene that we learn why and what her intentions were during this. Like Karen, Joyce develops a protective parental persona and gets between Will and the Demogorgon, and even tries to get between Will and Vecna in the end, but is thrown away very easily by Vecna. I did think she was gonna die in that, because I feel like it would be an ample time to kill her, and also because it's the finale. Vecna ultimately just tosses her to the side, and she sees Will's power later on. I feel like one thing that's really emphasized in this season is definitely parental involvement. We see it with Karen Finn and Joyce in protecting their kids. And we also see it in obviously Hopper, where he's protecting his daughter, Elle, and doesn't want her to go into the Upside Down because everybody's looking for her and deems it unnecessary for her to go in for some recon mission when they're probably not going to find anything anyways. In terms of Karen's development, like I said, she was portrayed as kind of like a tired side character, but in this season, she really amplifies her protective mother, who fights off a Demogorgon for her youngest daughter, Holly, nearly dying for her. I don't think she'll die now, considering that she's had scenes in the hospital, but you never know. I mean, there's still 5 more episodes. Her shouting, "Stay away from my daughter," really reminded me of Molly Weasley from Harry Potter fighting off Bellatrix, and she says, "Not my daughter, you bitch." I loved it. I immediately correlated it together with powerful mother energy, and it was one of my favorite things. Nancy and Steve also got a lot of character development in this season. Nancy has always kind of been portrayed as a badass, but she experienced a lot of, in her terms, avoidable trauma. Like if they had just acted sooner, she might not have experienced all of this. But one of my favorite scenes with her was when she tried to wash off her mother's blood from her hands, and the editing was so well done. The repeated frame of the soap dispenser really drove home that she could not wash off the blood fast enough or enough, and regardless of whether the blood was visible on her hands or not, it would still be there to her. Not to mention she had to continue on with her mother's blood on her clothes until she changed into the Candy Striper uniform, but still, that was such a good scene. Steve experiences the character development of going from a flirtatious, girl-savvy, desirable guy in season 1 to having his history come back to bite him when the girl who had to jack their car was a sister of one of his old flings who he stood up numerous times, and you can definitely see the change in how he has a relationship with women. This also reflects when he's trying to impress Nancy too, whether it's in a romantic gesture trying to win her back like Jonathan thinks, or if he's just trying to get her respect as a friend. Another one of my favorite characters in this season is definitely Lucas. Although he doesn't have like a main character role, I feel like his character has significant impact on this season, and especially with Max's character. Lucas prioritizes a lot of his time in playing Max's Running Up That Hill song in the hospital and rewinding it, and we find out later on the impact that song had on Max's story. In episode 4, she's telling Holly that she hears that music and follows it and gets to the brink of reality, but just before she can leave, the tape stops and he has to rewind it, and Vecna finds her, which leads her all back to square one. And that scene is just such an impactful scene for me. Max has been in a never-ending time loop where she, like she states, must choose either suicide, accepting her fate, or escaping. And the entire season, mostly off-screen, she's been navigating Henry's prison world while in a coma and going through all of her memories and Henry's, almost getting out, experiencing his Rainbow Room memories, high school memories, and then the mysterious canyon, kind of looks like the Grand Canyon, but cave memory that Henry refused to go into, like he's scared. And for a while, she's going through this trying to escape path. And then after Vecna chases her into that cave again, she kind of accepts her fate and tries to live with the life that she has now in the prison world. But when she sees that Holly is now in the prison world as well, she collects that they may actually be able to escape again. With antagonists like Dr. K and Acre, we don't know much about them, especially with like Dr. K. She really reminds me of Papa in a sense, so it kind of makes me wonder if she was kind of a replacement and a stylistic choice here. I'd be interested in learning more about her character and whether she actually has significant ties to Papa or not. I wonder why she actually wants 11. I'm sure we'll learn more about that in terms of 8's experience with all of this, which we'll probably find out in Volume 2. She did mention that she thinks 11 is kidnapping the kids in episode 4, but she doesn't know whether that's for good or bad, but it doesn't really seem to matter to her. For obvious reasons, 11 also experiences a lot of character development, and I feel like in this season especially, she's very personified. In other seasons, she is othered a lot just by kind of being the outsider and person with powers. And I feel like in this season, she's really grounded by experiences with Hopper, and she learns more about his late daughter, and I feel like in their experiences especially, she is very personified. Like Joyce, where we learn that she just doesn't want to lose Will, Hopper also shows vulnerability to Elle when they're in the Upside Down, saying that he has been so hard on her and implying that it's just because he doesn't want to lose her. The stubborn punk-ass scene was kind of a calm before the storm, which really made me feel like Hopper was definitely going to die later on, and we watch as Elle sees basically bombs strapped to Hopper's chest as he goes to approach what they think is Vecna behind the door, and we later find out that it's 8. But I think that's the second time that we think that Hopper is going to die just in this volume alone. Like, he's had predicted deaths like at the end of season 3, but he doesn't actually die, he comes back, which is another reason why I feel like he's going to die in the end, because I feel like they've been baiting us with it from the beginning. And I don't know, there's a lot of characters who I think we're gonna die, but I'll recap that at the end of the episode. Another indirect antagonist, in a sense, is developed in this season as well. The hedgehog, also known as 11's kryptonite, is a signal that paralyzes her and nullifies her powers in a sense. The funny thing is, though, I noticed it right away and it kind of irked me, is the siren is the stereotypical like alarm clock for iPhone. And so as the siren goes off through the entire episode, off and on, and at one point consistently, I was just sitting there kind of annoyed because like Jacob never wakes up to his alarm, so like I hear that all the time consistently. I associated that with not being able to sleep in, and I just thought it was funny. They could have picked any sound effect and they chose that. As I stated before, Derek Turnbow starts off as like a kind of villain, a very, very low stakes villain in the beginning, more like a bully in episode 1. And later on, he becomes Delightful Derek when he teams up with the party and the protagonists. And his development and story begins with the slow pan throughout the classroom where he's revealed to be Vecna's next target. And that's confirmed when we see him acknowledge Henry in the back of the room. After faking agreement with Joyce and refusing to cooperate in the barn after they had kidnapped him, which I don't blame him, he finally decides to work as the inside man after seeing the Demogorgon and the monster is actually at hand, and he becomes a major protagonist in Volume 1. We do see him being dragged off by a Demogorgon in the end, so I don't know how his development is going to be shaped in Volume 2, but I am very eager to see where his story goes. Erica has some character development in this season, but it's mostly in terms of navigating how much time has passed. I feel like her indication being in the same science class that the party started out in was a major part of her character development, and also her friendship breakup with Tina that allowed her to basically be recruited despite the Turnbows so they could kidnap them was her major development. But Polly, on the other hand, starts out as a two-dimensional character in the last few seasons, casted completely differently, but she gets a lot bigger role this season. Like when she gets the note in the mail, we are inclined to think that Henry is luring her out into the woods, but it's really Max. And as she's going out into the woods, she wraps herself up in Henry's Boy Scout gear and clutches Holly the Heroic and makes her way into the woods, really emphasizing like the D&D persona of and characteristics of this series entirely. All in all, I feel like relationships in this season were definitely emphasized, like Jonathan and Steve, Erica and Tina, like those classic arch enemies. I also felt like Steve and Dustin had kind of an arch enemy vibe to them this season, unlike previous seasons where they were inseparable. They are now no longer a comedic duo. Instead, they're arguing and down each other's throats all the time. Even Jonathan, who doesn't even get along with Steve, yelled at them to stop fighting, and they actually end up crashing their car in the Upside Down because they're fighting. Other relationships like Nancy and Mike, when they had to bond and play certain roles like the candy striper and the patient in the hospital to get information from their mother about Mr. Whatsit, and Will and Robin, who bond about learning about their sexuality, and Robin helping Will find confidence in himself, really are on the other side of the spectrum in terms of relationships, because unlike the negative relationships like archetypes with Jonathan and Steve and Dustin and Steve, these relationships have a positive outcome on not just the series, but with the character development of the characters entirely. One of the major plot points, I believe, in Robin and Will's relationship is when they're in the tunnels and Robin shares her experience about how she used to look for all the answers in other people, but she really had all the answers. And if Cammy loved me, all of me, I wouldn't be so scared anymore. And this indirectly relates to how Will views Mike. And I definitely believe we're gonna see more of that in Volume 2 in the season finale. I'd be really interested in how they approach Will and Mike's relationship, because we know a decent amount about it, but we don't know how they're going to perceive it. And a major relationship in this series has definitely got to be Henry and Holly, because as I stated before, Henry comes off as the hero or the nice guy in terms of the children's perspective, but we as the audience know that he is not a good guy. And I think Holly really starts to sense that, especially when she finds Max in the woods. When Henry says blackberries are her favorite without any way of knowing that, I feel like that's the first sign where she sees that something is off with his character. And when he tells her to never under any circumstances go into the woods, while it seems like he's trying to protect her, she learns that he is definitely not the good guy, and eventually she has to leave Max and go back to the house, which we'll see more in Volume 2, but I can only imagine that's going to fail and he's going to find out and threaten her. And there are a few questions that I have about the series, like why there was an 11 decoy being chased by the government in episode 1. Like, are there people who are supporting 11 and trying to hide her? I don't know. It hasn't been touched on again, so I'm wondering if they're gonna fill that hole in Volume 2. And like I was saying before, like, is Dr. K related to Papa? Or is she just kind of a replacement? I'm also very curious as to how they built that much in the Upside Down without getting absolutely mauled. So many of the scenes that we see in Season 5 are people getting obliterated by the advancements of the Upside Down. So I'd be curious to see how they built such a mega base in the Upside Down and are able to travel to and from without getting killed. I mean, we did see them getting pretty messed up in this season, but off screen, they had to have made a lot of progress without getting hurt. Also, some plot holes that I noticed, or maybe some criticisms, I guess. There is a conspiracy that Karen was Henry's sister due to flashbacks in Season 4, but I feel like in the moment where Karen revealed Mr. Whatsit's name to Mike and Nancy, I feel like if she was his sister, there would be some correlation and at least some tension in editing there, but there wasn't. And one last question is that, like, I know Max's parents are considered to be, like, abusive and not good parents, but why haven't we seen them at all, or any of her family with her at the hospital? Like, I know Billy is dead, so he can't be there, but her parents are not present in that section whatsoever. The only person that's really in the hospital with her is Lucas. In terms of what we'll see in the next season, I do feel like we will definitely see the correlation between Will's disappearance and Holly's disappearance and what the timing has to do with the bigger picture. Holly and Henry's relationship will definitely change due to getting closer to the finale and the threat level increasing. I think if Holly finds herself in this bit of a pickle, music is definitely going to be a big enhancement like it was in last season. We even see Henry gift Holly a tape of I Think We're Alone Now, one of her favorite songs by Tiffany, and she ends up talking to that before she goes out into the woods. So it makes me wonder whether he has an indication with music or if it's just kind of like a way that we can get that music into the scene so that way she has something to listen to later. I'm not sure, but I feel like it's definitely going to come into play. And for plot reasons, I think we're definitely going to learn why the wall is so significant and scary to Vecna. I think it might have to do with something with Hawkins' lab, but I'm not sure. And we'll definitely see the correlation and working together with 8 and 11 again, and how she ended up in the hands of Dr. K. In terms of deaths, I feel like I was saying, I feel like 11 and Hopper have to die. I feel like, especially with like 11, I feel like the government's not going to stop looking for her, regardless of if even they wiped the entire camp off the planet. There's still going to be people who would look more for her. The military is huge. I guess the same thing can go with Will now, even though they're not really aware of Will's powers. I feel like if the government learns about this, I mean, they kind of did. If anyone was alive on that platform when Will was doing that, they know that he has powers now, so that might be a problem. On top of that, for the longest time, I have been obsessed with the trope with Steve and Dustin, where their line was, if you die, I die. I feel like if they don't kill them both off at the same time, it's a missed opportunity. It also leaves room for them to make up right before they die, or I don't know. I'm really curious as to how they end this, considering it's been 10 years in the making and there's very significant built-up characters. I feel like the refusal to kill some of their main characters in the end is definitely just plot armor in its finest. We never know who it's going to be. But yeah, I think that's about time. I really appreciate you joining me in this longer episode, and I'm glad that we have this shared interest that we can talk about together. I am super excited to talk to you guys next year, and I hope you guys have an amazing holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and other holidays that you celebrate. I will see you guys all next year in 2026 in this season that will continue in January, but especially in the project that we have moving forward with the small business and entrepreneurs. I think you guys will really enjoy it, and I'm really excited to produce that new content with guests. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys all in the new year of 2026. Bye!